The World War II, which spread throughout the world, had come to an end, but the decline of the British Empire had just begun. The United States and the Soviet Union longed for the glorious years to come, knowing that the dilapidated aristocracy was no longer their obstacle. I don't agree with their idea, but dismantling British India first is not entirely a bad thing. Keywords of the novel. No pop-ups for British civil servants. Download the complete TXT collection of British civil servants, and read the latest chapters of British civil servants. Chapter 1. Is, Governor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 is, Governor. The noisy noise outside the car window kept coming, but Alan Wilson had already developed the ability to turn a deaf ear, isolating himself from the curry-flavored English of the outside world. His young face was as if it had been ironed, and his gaze did not shift from the newspaper in his hand. The headline on the front page was eye-catching, stating, "The British Empire has the confidence to recover the entire Burma in a few months." Ah! With a faint sigh, the voice was so low that even the person involved couldn't hear it. Alan Wilson put away the newspaper and looked out the window calmly, with no strong accent of English sales in his ear. Now the bus has crossed the Delhi Gate and entered the area that later became the capital of India, New Delhi. It is now 1945, and the biggest difference between New Delhi and Delhi is that New Delhi is completely British. Due to the remote location of Kolkata, the capital of British India was relocated to a newly built urban area in Delhi, which has long been inhabited only by British people. In 1945, this was the biggest problem Alan Wilson faced. The British Empire, which had ruled the world for 300 years, had already declined. Although it still had 30 million square kilometers of colonies and 5 million troops fighting on battlefields around the world, the end of this world war marked the beginning of the decline of the British Empire. Compared to the two armies of the United States and the Soviet Union, one dominating land and the other dominating the ocean, it seems that the post-war world no longer holds the position of the former British Empire, which makes Alan Wilson, a civil servant preparing to replicate the journey of countless classic protagonists, feel at a loss. With the blessing of past life memories, Alan Wilson naturally understood that the horn of the dissolution of the British Empire was sounded on the land under his current feet, the most important colony of the British Empire in the world, with an area of over 4 million square kilometers, in British India. And this is simply unstoppable. Not to mention that Alan Wilson is just an inexperienced civil servant, even though he is now the Governor-General of India, he cannot ignore the independent voice that has become a consensus in British India. All he can think of is whether it is sooner or later, and what benefits he can gain from it. After getting off the bus and passing through the inspection of the guards, Alan Wilson stood in front of the Indian Governor-General's office, which looked very much like the White House. His eyes swept past the British Indian flag on the dome of the Governor-General's office, and he knew that the road ahead was ahead. "Sir, what's wrong with you?" The guard who had just checked looked at Alan Wilson with a hint of amusement, but a young person like you is rare in the governor's office. "I'll just assume you're praising me, thank you," Alan Wilson replied with a smile, slightly bowing his head. He also concealed his embarrassment and walked towards a building that was somewhat similar to the White House. In the Governor-General's office, there were hurried office workers, and in a well-lit room, the current Governor-General of India, Archibald Percival Weaver, was reaching out in front of the fireplace to absorb heat. Without looking back, he asked, "Have the people of Bahrain, the Muhammad, and the Congress Party left?" "Yes, Governor, they have already left." The man named Balin appeared to be in his 40s, with a smooth and well-groomed face, and answered solemnly, "Every time we meet, the differences between the two sides seem to be more, not less, than the last time. This is not only for both sides, but also for us." "Damn it, the Prime Minister definitely doesn't want to hear this news," Governor Weaver cursed in a low voice, but rather with a sigh of helplessness rather than a verbal abuse. Compared to the public news that the British and Indian armies on the front line have already invaded Myanmar and are about to shed their shame on the Japanese, the internal conflicts that occasionally headache him can always dilute his good mood as the Governor of India. They, along with their representatives Ali Jinnah and Nehru, really give us a headache. Mr. Governor. Although Balin still had a calm expression, he had to admit that the biggest question was whether the pearl of the British Empire would still shine as brightly as it is now, compared to the world war that has already seen the dawn of victory. There was a suffocating awkwardness in the room, with no sound except for the charcoal fire burning in the fireplace. Although there are some liberal imperialists within the Conservative Party who claim that India and even the entire colony have invested more than output, they hope that the British Empire will abandon the entire colony and stop the current loss-making trade. Just like Adam, the author of The Wealth of Nations 150 years ago, who called for the independence of the 13 states of North America, he believed that British India had become a black hole that consumed the wealth of the British Empire, just like the original 13 states of North America. But in the Conservative Party, this voice is not mainstream. The Prime Minister of the British Empire, Churchill, has always claimed to defend the glory of the British Empire, but now several prominent figures in British India know in their hearts that things are far from so simple. Tell London, Baron, about the news of the British and Indian Legion going deep into Myanmar. Governor Weaver withdrew his hands from the fireplace and sighed. London still hopes to have more good news and put the matter of the Congress Party and the Mohammed behind. Yes, Governor. With a programmed smile, Balin agreed and took a few steps back from the room. Throughout the Governor-General's Office of India, as usual during times of war, everyone wore a hurried tone, dealing with information about British India and the entire Southeast Asian battlefield, appearing very busy. Balin, who had left Governor Weaver, waited for his guests today with a gentle face. At this moment, he was not idle, but focused on playing chess with himself. Not long after, the assistant pushed the door open and followed Alan Wilson in. Without looking up, Baron took the final step and played the chess game before looking up at the young man in front of him. Standing up, he extended his finger to a place for Alan Wilson to sit down, then returned to his position and took out a stack of file bags. He looked at the person on his own, and in his spare time, he looked at them as if verifying their identity. You are the son of Groot Wilson, and I am deeply saddened by your father's departure. He has a good relationship with me, Baron said as he looked at the documents. You were born in London in 1924 and followed your father's work to live in Xinjiang. Prior to the Pearl Harbor incident, you obtained extremely important intelligence for the Allies, and then fell to Kolkata in Xinjiang colony. Before the war, you had already been admitted to Oriental College, Oxford University. Speaking of which, Balin closed his file bag and said, your father could have had a bigger job, but unfortunately, there are still more diseases here in South Asia. Alan, you are even younger than I imagined. Perhaps this is not an advantage. Entering the Eastern style mainly stems from his father's work experience, Alan Wilson replied softly, feeling a sigh in his heart. He had already used the special environment of the colony to persuade his father to increase his age by 3 years, because the curriculum in primary and secondary schools was not very difficult for him. This makes the growth experience appear more normal. As for providing intelligence on Pearl Harbor, his original intention was to become a capable second-generation wealthy man, while gilding and allowing his father, who was a civil servant, to soar to fame. However, fate did not meet his expectations, and the responsibility of entrepreneurship fell on his own shoulders. Very good, but don't be overly modest. Your studies are very beautiful. If it weren't for the outbreak of World War, you could have become the youngest graduate of Oxford University in recent years. Baron nodded satisfied as he sat in his chair, and then the conversation changed. Although you haven't completed your studies, some concepts about Orientalism have accumulated. What do you think of India as a place? Baron knew the purpose of the person at this age, and similarly, Alan Wilson knew the purpose of the question asked by the civil servant leader. Both sides knew each other's thoughts and understood each other's intentions. Alan Wilson pondered for a moment and quickly gave the answer. Undoubtedly, during the agricultural era, Eastern countries were able to accumulate much larger wealth than Europe due to their advantages in scale and geographical factors. South Asia was one of the best, and both in the past and present, British India has always been the cornerstone of the prosperity of the British Empire, the most brilliant pearl on the crown. With a nod of approval, Baron heard Alan Wilson continue, it was thanks to the wealth created by extensive colonies that the British Empire was able to face the attacks of one challenger after another, whether it was Napoleon or William II. India is a land of wealth, and Oxford University has launched a systematic study of Orientalism, producing a large number of talents with a broad perspective and narrower thinking than other European countries, who have a better understanding of the essence of the world. Speaking of which, Alan Wilson also praised Oxford University. He knew that Baron also came from Oxford University, which brought the two sides closer in this regard. Obviously, Balan was very satisfied with the young man who came here. Thinking of the good relationship between the other party's father and himself, he also had a hint of support in his heart. In British India, Balan's authority is not inferior to a few prominent figures. As the leader of the civil service, Balan quickly asked about his views on British India, as well as his understanding of local Indian politicians such as Gandhi, Nehru, and Ali Jinnah, as well as the Congress Party in the Muhammad, which are currently in turmoil. Alan Wilson has provided his own answers and some future ideas. It's written about the UK, not India. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Commissioner Hyderabad. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Commissioner Hyderabad. Do you think Nehru is a formidable figure? Baron asked with his fingers crossed in an uncertain tone. Yes, Sir Baron, Alan Wilson nodded solemnly. Nehru's own ideas are more worthy of attention than Gandhi, who has always dreamed of rural life. Alan Wilson's voice was not loud, but he was incredibly firm. As for Nehru alone, he is a person that cannot be compared to the later Modi immortals. On the other hand, Alashina, who represents another faction, is also a thoroughly secularized political figure. Whether Hinduism or pacifism, they are both tools in the hands of two people, and they themselves do not have any religious color. Compared to Nehru, Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muhammad, is a leader who is completely close to the West, and even the religious beliefs of the Muhammad have not been seen by Ali Jinnah for a long time. However, as a minority, Alashina was inevitably influenced by the Muhammad, and his health was poor. After his death, the Muhammad and Pakistan quickly entered the path of religious transformation. Nehru of the National Congress Party is completely different. Nehru always respects Indian culture, but is not hesitant when it comes to taking action. During his tenure, he carried out land reforms, defeated Pakistan externally, and reversed the world's impression of the cowardly fighting power of Hindus. The recovery of Portuguese Goa has boosted the confidence of the entire Indian nation. Ultimately, Alan Wilson believed that this had a huge relationship with Nehru's visit to a new Soviet Union when he was young. The emergence of the Soviet Union was a huge event for the entire world and had a huge impact on Nehru at that time, which was very normal. After India gained independence, Nehru adopted a large number of Soviet methods to solve domestic problems. If it weren't for that war, Nehru might have really built India into a powerful and colorful country. Listening to the young man standing in front of him answering his questions with a serious demeanor, Balan nodded satisfied and a strange emotion surged in his heart. It was hard to imagine that this understanding was spoken from a young man in his 20s. We are currently in a period of war, and many departments need talent. Sir Baron pondered for a moment and spoke. During the Battle of Impel, your father did a lot of work in Kolkata. Whether it was the war zone, the governor's office, or the colonial department, they all saw it. We also need to consider the views of those who contributed. With Baron's words, Alan Wilson became even more cautious, knowing that his path lay within the other person's grasp. Well, considering your age, Mumbai, Kolkata, and even Delhi are a bit too conspicuous. The job you're starting in is not suitable for you in the 17 provinces of India right now. But for the sake of your father's face, I can let you start working from an easy position, a job with a high status. Balan thought as he thought, what do you think of becoming a commissioner in Hyderabad? Ah. Thank you, Sir Baron. Alan Wilson was stunned for a moment, and then endured the surprise in his heart and thanked him. British India is governed by the Governor-General's Office and the British Commissioner, with a total of 17 provinces, occupying 2/3 of the current British India. The remaining 1/3 of the land is distributed among more than 560 states. These land states vary in size, with smaller ones being just larger landlords, while larger ones are highly respected in England as heads of state. Among the more than 500 tribal states, the strongest one is Hyderabad, as Sir Baron referred to it. It is the largest in terms of area and population among British India, and its strength is far stronger than Kashmir, which later caused multiple Indo-Pakistani wars. While Alan Wilson was still pondering, Sir Baron spoke on his own. Although Hyderabad is not actually under the control of British India, its importance is no less than that of the provinces controlled by the Governor-General's Office. Among the more than 500 states, Hyderabad can be seen as a barometer, so don't worry, the importance is the same. Sir Baron also felt that Alan Wilson was somewhat disappointed with his arrangements, explaining the importance of Hyderabad. He pointed out, the local ruler now is Mir Osman Ali Khan, a respected ruler in London, and communication with him is no less important than working in the province we control. Perhaps working in various provinces of India would increase one's freedom, but considering Alan Wilson's age, Sir Baron is not suitable for excessive personal relationships. In the indirectly ruled Indian states of the British Empire, giving each other a good position would not be too conspicuous and would not be caught by others. Now, after all, it is the period of World War, and some past rules can be broken, but it is also necessary to control a certain degree of heat. Alan Wilson was not dissatisfied with this, and he also knew that Sir Baron in front of him had done his best. Within the current rules, he could only do so much. During the Battle of Impel, your father helped me a lot and maintained stability in India. Finally, Sir Baron mentioned the past, and Alan Wilson understood. Speaking of Alan Wilson's father, since he fled to India, old Wilson quickly found a way to continue working in the civil service system and eventually established himself in Kolkata. Kolkata was the capital of British India before New Delhi, and Britain operated in Kolkata for half a century. It was only 30 years ago that the capital was located in New Delhi, making it undoubtedly the second largest city in India in this era. After the Battle of Burma, the center of Bangladesh faced the threat of the Japanese army directly, until the outbreak of the Battle of Impel. As for old Wilson, it was during this time that he maintained the operation of Kolkata as instructed by Sir Baron. But this is not what Sir Baron meant. The main reason why he looked up to Alan Wilson was because of the outbreak of the Great Famine in Bangladesh. British India always experienced famines, but 2 years ago, over 3 million people died from hunger in Bangladesh. It was around the time of the Battle of Impel that old Wilson was undoubtedly to blame, and Sir Baron, the leader of British Indian civil servants working in the Governor-General's Office, was also to blame. Alan Wilson breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. Due to his father's connections, he finally got what he wanted from the Governor-General's Office. At this moment, Sir Baron spoke up, "Don't be too happy too early. I only have the right to recommend candidates. You should know that the final decision is still in the hands of Governor Weaver. If nothing unexpected happens, I will inform you of the good news in a while." "Thank you, Sir Baron." Alan Wilson took out a gold coin and said to himself, "I got it from a businessman. Personally, I hope Sir Baron doesn't care about his metallic composition, but instead sees precious Indian history from it, just like the academic issues studied by the Oriental Academy, and sees the vast Eastern world. Precious historical value, I think so." Sir Baron tacitly reached out to take it and glanced at the sunlight shining through the window, seeming to be quite impressed by the patterns on it. "The normal update will start tomorrow, and I will also celebrate Mid-Autumn Festival with my family, especially recently." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. World's Richest Man. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. World's richest man. It was only now that Sir Baron realized in his heart how important it was to promote the younger generation and provide fresh blood to the civil service system of the British Empire, which was also for the sake of political stability. Alan Wilson has his own understanding that British India is a gem on the imperial crown in every aspect. More important than Canada, Australia, even the earlier 13 states of North America, and all other British colonies. As for any colony under its jurisdiction, it cannot be compared to British India from any perspective, and it is simply the loss of British India and the comfort of the British themselves. The reason for saying this is because British India has a huge size, and even relies on its own advantages in area, resources, and population. Its economic output and important economic indicators have surpassed modernized Japan, making it the largest in Asia and far superior to other imperial entities. During World War I, at the same time, the fiscal revenue of the British and Indian governments was 1 billion rupees, about £100 million, about half of that of the British mainland, basically on par with the Japanese government, and far exceeding entities such as Canada, Australia, and South Africa. This still takes into account the naval competition between Britain and Germany, and the result of the local British gritting their teeth and raising taxes. If it were in peacetime, the fiscal revenue of British India would be an indispensable part of the British Empire. This led to the extremely important position of British India. Apart from Napoleon's brief time, Britain put in effort in Europe. For almost all of the 19th century, Britain formulated policies for the security of British India, whether it was attacking Burma or going north to Afghanistan. If it weren't for 1945, Alan Wilson had reason to believe that British civil servants would definitely have worked tirelessly across the ocean to come to India to work. After all, this is a colony, and there is no need to endure various checks and balances on the British mainland. Working in the colony can enjoy the same treatment as a human being. So Sir Baron did indeed give Alan Wilson great convenience. If he were to step back a few decades, he could even be said to have risen to the sky with one step, reducing his struggle by 20 years. But now it's different. Alan Wilson understands that the jewel on the crown of British India is about to break free from the control of the British Empire. Now he must use the limited time left to accumulate as much experience and wealth as possible, which is not an easy task. He silently prepared to accept Hyderabad's position, which, although a land state belonging to the indirect rule of Britain, had a significant advantage in it. Just like the monarch of Hyderabad, Mir Osman Ali Khan. This person's popularity is worldwide, as he was praised by the United States as the world's richest person in 1937. Hyderabad will become a starting point for Alan Wilson's future career, and he hopes for some smooth sailing. Alan Wilson left the Governor-General's office because Sir Baron had already stated that he could recruit a few assistants on his own, with the help of trustworthy people, making work always easier. Before leaving, Alan Wilson was still carrying a file bag. Sir Baron said that it contained assessment questions for British Indian civil servants, which made Wilson sigh. Is it still impossible to avoid exams? But when he thought about it, his mood relaxed, which was much smoother than before. Being able to secure the position of Commissioner Hyderabad was already an extra joy, and he couldn't ask for too much more. Taking the bus home and opening the test paper, one can actually see some of the real environment in British India from the paper. The relationship between the Muhammad and the National Congress Party, as well as the British Indian provinces and states, are currently issues that the Governor-General's office needs to address. On the other hand, Sir Baron is currently working to persuade Governor Weaver about the matter of Commissioner Hyderabad. A child who can be said to be a genius, if it weren't for the outbreak of war, might have been the youngest person to enroll in Oxford University in recent years, but still a bit too young. Governor Weaver frowned and asked in response, is it too smooth for him to start as Commissioner of Hyderabad? On the contrary, Mr. Governor, the Commissioner of Hyderabad is more suitable. Being placed in a province is different from being placed in a land state. The Monarch of Hyderabad is a distinguished guest of London, and according to our agreement with the land state, the power placed in Hyderabad cannot be too much, and we cannot do it now. British India is already busy with 100,000 civil servants. For a land state like Hyderabad with such strong power, we need to maintain the position of commissioner, and cannot go too far. One-sided interference will also make the monarch of Hyderabad unhappy, so it is appropriate for Alan to go. Sir Baron spoke confidently and went around, circling around. Just to make it clear, Alan Wilson is the most suitable commissioner for Hyderabad and not the second choice. The direction of the war is already very clear, and the Axis powers are at a dead end. However, from the perspective of British India, the future direction is still uncertain. Whether British India will continue to be under British rule or become independent directly in the future is uncertain. Governor Weaver and Sir Baron, of course, understood that distant London was also engaged in fierce arguments over the issue of British India. In this matter, they not only had to be wary of the Soviet Union, but also of another comrade in arms, the United States, who fought side by side. To some extent, the United States was even more dangerous than the Soviet Union. For the 100,000 civil servants in British India, the future is still uncertain, and even Governor Weaver and Sir Baron, the Governor of British India and the civil servant leaders in British India, cannot guarantee their say in this matter. Under this uncertainty, Sir Baron himself could not see the future, and a small unreasonable arrangement was no longer a big deal. In the middle of the night, while Alan Wilson was still answering questions, Sir Baron asked supporters of British Indian rule in his final exam paper. After a long period of contemplation, he wrote, "The untouchable class, as well as the monarchs of over 500 states, are the two opponents of the Congress party in the Muhammad, while Nehru and Arizina have only different means. The National Congress Party, represented by Nehru, wants to take over all the rights of British India, while the Muhammad led by Ali Jinnah does not want to live in the same country as Hindus. These two are similar to the British Indian government, but different from each other for pacifists and Hindus. This is a conflict between the Muhammad and the National Congress Party. Under the rule of British India, only the untouchable have certain rights. As for the monarchs of over 500 states, they are willing to maintain their current status, but have doubts about the Congress Party and the Muhammad. For the state of Hyderabad that I am about to visit, my mission is to make the Hyderabad monarch the support of British India. Mir Osman Ali Khan, with the most powerful power among many Indian states, is also a pacifist and a minority in India, even in Hyderabad. It is believed that Mir Osman Ali Khan is very willing to maintain a harmonious relationship with London. Who is the enemy and who is the friend has always been a very important question. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Great Official Power. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Great Official Power. The knowledge of South Asia is sufficient. Sir Baron held Alan Wilson's answer sheet and couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Although he was considered an open book exam and gave Alan Wilson the opportunity to cheat, this understanding may indicate that although Alan Wilson is young, he has mature abilities to handle things. On the surface, he remained calm and said, "The institutions stationed in the Hyderabad state are mainly for communicating with the monarch of Hyderabad, but they only have over 200 people. Even if all the institutions in Hyderabad are combined, we are less than 1,000 British people. Although not as important as Delhi, Mumbai, and Kolkata, it is still a very important place. We must maintain a harmonious relationship with the monarch, Mir Osman Ali Khan. To maintain a harmonious relationship, I believe the most important thing is sincerity. In this regard, I am prepared, Sir Baron." Alan Wilson nodded slightly and spoke, "The local government has its own currency, and the monarch controls the railway, post office, and army. Mir Osman Ali Khan's own attitude towards London will play an important leading role in the current over 500 states. I will definitely be very sincere in interacting with people." "You know, that's good. I'll give you the appointment letter in 3 days. How's the newly recruited assistant going? I heard you went to Delhi University and recruited all young people." Sir Baron answered with satisfaction, then changed the tone. Although I don't want to interfere with your work, the arrogance of young people should be put away. The assistant you recruited should be restrained. Our rule over British India is not just high pressure, but full of flexibility. High pressure is not the solution to problems, sometimes we have to find solutions from the traditions of South Asia. Alan Wilson nodded, wondering how to maintain maximum stability with minimal force. I believe there is no one more skilled than Britain. During a period of existence in British India, the Governor-General also attempted to break the caste system, but later found that he did not awaken the support of the lower class for the British Empire, but instead caused an impact on the rule of Britain by the middle and upper classes. He then abandoned the idea of attacking the caste system and did not encounter irreparable chaos afterwards. As for the relationship between the two major religions in mainland India, in the history of British India, the Governor-General of British India has repeatedly made horizontal jumps, and Hinduism, pacifism, and Sikhism have become important forces for the Governor-General's office at different times. As for his current destination, the state of Hyderabad, perfectly meets the conditions of British India's division and rule. Hyderabad is currently the largest principality in British India, with an area similar to that of the British mainland and a population of 20 million. From any perspective, its strength is no less than that of any province in British India. What pleased Alan Wilson even more was that monarch Mir Osman Ali Khan was a pacifist. 80% of the population in Hyderabad is Hindu. This is completely opposite to Kashmir, which later sparked a dispute between Pakistan and India. Kashmir is a Hindu monarch, ruling over the majority of pacifists in its jurisdiction. Unfortunately, the monarch, the Hyderabad state of Mir Osman Ali Khan, was too far from the present-day British India, where the power of pacifists was strong, to receive support from the people of the same faith. The entire Hyderabad state was surrounded by India, which ultimately led to the failure of Mir Osman Ali Khan's independence plan. Mir Osman Ali Khan is known for his wealth and is considered one of the wealthiest people in the world due to his wealth of jewelry and gold. Speculatively worth $2 billion in this era. Therefore, it was published in Time magazine in the United States. Since the 18th century, Ali Khan's family has ruled the state of Hyderabad in India. Ali Khan is the only Indian who does not reside in England but enjoys a noble royal title, mainly because he donated a huge sum of money to the British Treasury without compensation during World War I. After the new official took office, Alan Wilson also handed over the list of assistants he had selected from Delhi University to Sir Baron, the leader of British Indian civil servants. In fact, 100,000 British civil servants controlled such a large colony in British India. There is no problem of bloated institutions. Even if there is this issue, it is still a problem for millions of Indian civil servants. So Sir Baron did not have any objections to the selection of the 10 assistants, even if some of these college students who have just graduated from Delhi University or have not had enough qualifications, it is still not a problem. The main issue with the review is that we do not want these young people from Delhi University to exhibit obvious Soviet tendencies. Sir Baron did not conceal this from Alan Wilson, as he was prepared for the expansion of Soviet influence, which had been going on almost since the establishment of the Soviet Union. During World War II, Britain made every effort to direct Germany's anger towards the Soviet Union, and in the end, it was considered partially successful. The unsuccessful part was borne by the British Empire itself. You should know that there is now an organization called the Cambridge Five on the mainland of Britain. Would it go crazy? Listening to Sir Baron's words, Alan Wilson's lips couldn't help but twitch, which was the proud work of the Soviet spy agency during the Cold War. The thoughts in my mind also flashed by. The current situation of the Cambridge Five heroes is too far from his current job. Whether it is to use the other person's power for promotion or to add luster to his resume with their life, it is the future. Now he must first make achievements in British India, the most important colony that is almost about to leave Britain. Because of the importance of British India, Sir Baron felt that being too careful was not an exaggeration, and in the end, nothing was found. With the appointment letter of Commissioner Alan Wilson Hyderabad, everything came to an end. In front of the 10 male and female assistants from Delhi University who had just finished investigating whether they were pro-Soviet elements, Al Wilson finally found a hint of leadership. Although these 10 assistants, along with himself, were all in their 20s and looked like children's play, it was not so unacceptable in the context of World War. We are going to work in the land of Hyderabad in the Deccan Plateau. Once again, I have something to explain in advance. Alan Wilson cleared his throat and spoke in an official tone as he looked at his assistants who could be described by his team. When dealing with Lord Hyderabad, it is necessary to show politeness. We can advise on internal matters in Hyderabad, but there must be no interference. That's just a homeland, we represent the British Empire, murmured an assistant named Andy softly. The monarch of Hyderabad is a distinguished guest of London, and even the Queen would treat him with respect. The land states are not directly under the jurisdiction of the governor's office, and the monarch's authority in the land states cannot be challenged. This is different from the provinces within British India. Alan Wilson spoke calmly, unless you think your authority is greater than that of the Queen. Alan has already entered the role of a commissioner before he sets off, really. What a great official prestige. Is it possible that the interval has been a bit long? I am quite skilled at coding now. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Daily Fighting in India. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5 Daily Fighting in India. After the first social assault on these college students who had just left campus and entered society, Alan Wilson continued, since our country entered South Asia, Hyderabad has always appeared as an ally of our country. As early as when Hyderabad was still called Nizam, it helped us defeat the Maratha Empire. In the 3 Maratha Wars, Hyderabad sent troops to help the expeditionary forces achieve decisive victories, and in the 4 Mysore Wars, it was the same. Even after the Indian Uprising in 1857, our relationship with Hyderabad has been harmonious until now. After the Indian Uprising, British India no longer aimed to devour and annex. It can be said that it was only then that the Indian princes joined the Indian Uprising to some extent and achieved their goals. Of course, the biggest beneficiary was the Hyderabad state, which had always appeared as a British ally. After the powerful local forces of Maratha and Mysore were eliminated, Hyderabad became the most powerful remaining Indian prince. Before that, the operation of the East India Company was to use excuses to cause trouble for these land states, using the excuse that the other party had no offspring to confiscate their land, or finding some other excuse to directly manage the land of these land states. This method is very similar to the Ming and Qing dynasties' land reform and return policy, which was to find ways to transfer the land of these land states to the management of the East India Company. After the Indian Uprising, the land reform and return policy even stopped, forming a pattern of more than 500 land states in South Asia today. Before leaving, Alan Wilson, who had just entered the British civil service and was still a rookie, gave a profound ideological education to his assistants who were even more inexperienced than himself. Commissioner Hyderabad was, in a sense, a consultant, and was not qualified to pretend to be a dragon in front of Mir Osman Ali Khan. If in a typical period, the Commissioner of Hyderabad was almost indistinguishable from a eunuch, and could be easily ignored in front of the Hyderabad monarch, London would not be dissatisfied with the most powerful feudal monarch in present-day British India just because a commissioner was ignored. However, in reality, at least Alan Wilson believes it is different. The British are indeed superior in British India, but the boundaries between class and ethnicity are not completely unbreakable. It's already 1945 now, and Alan Wilson doesn't have any clever tricks to help British India continue to exist. It's not that I haven't thought about it at all, but it's all in my dreams. At this sensitive point in time, the UK's withdrawal from South Asia is a trend, and he believes there is still a lot he can do, whether from a personal interest perspective or from a broader perspective to have a positive impact. As for the possibility of small sacrifices in this process, it requires the great Indian people to be more forgiving. Even his own cheap father, due to a slight change in history, has become the person who directly operated the Great Famine in Bangladesh. In the face of the worsening situation of Indians, it is not much for Alan Wilson to work even harder. A few days before taking office in Hyderabad, as the newly appointed Hyderabad Commissioner, Alan Wilson did not show respect to the vast people of British India as he claimed, but turned around and planned a route. Which city along the Ganges River is densely populated and has some industrial facilities? Sir Baron was taken aback by Alan Wilson's question. Why did this young man not rush to take office in Hyderabad, but instead asked such an endless question? The Central and United Provinces are the most densely populated areas in South Asia, Sir Baron replied inexplicably. Alan, what are you asking about this? Hyderabad is in South India. Sir Baron, I'm just trying to figure out which route is suitable, Alan Wilson replied with a light smile. In fact, it's just his selfish desire to see the real landscape of the Ganges, whether it's as unattractive as later generations, whether there are any pollutants or corpses inside. This is also for the sake of the British Empire. Although he was unaware of the local public opinion in the process of British India's independence, according to common sense, Britain, which is still the world's three giants, will definitely have a backlash against allowing India's independence. If this kind of public opinion backlash is to be eliminated, Alan has a less obvious trick. He remembers the famous Ganges floating corpses in later generations, and that set of photos is not only famous in China, but widely circulated in countries around the world. If viewed from a cultural attack perspective, a set of photos of the Ganges floating corpses has almost trampled on the dignity of the entire Indian people, and together with the important position of the Ganges in Hinduism, it has almost brought huge negative impacts to the country of India. Along with the fermenting Indian rape a few years later and the topic of toilets, the entire India has been nailed to a pillar of shame. In this way, after British India lost control, Alan Wilson could use the collected information to make the public opinion in the UK more receptive and win this public opinion battle. As long as it is shown that it is not Britain that is not awesome, but India's mud that cannot support the wall, Britain cannot continue to waste time in that cesspool, it will give British people a psychological comfort, and it is not difficult to accept India's independence from the moral level. Unfortunately, until Alan Wilson set off, he still couldn't find the scene he wanted in the upper reaches of the Ganges. Fortunately, there were still 2 years left, and Alan wasn't particularly anxious. Alan Wilson, who left New Delhi and boarded the train, officially began his civil service career. Before arriving in Hyderabad, he had already memorized the information of the local monarch, Mir Osman Ali Khan. Ali Khan had a thin and emaciated physique, and no matter how he looked, he didn't look like a wealthy man. His diligence, frugality, and thrift were also well known far and wide. He only wore a hat in his life and usually wore worn-out loose pants. Every time he eats, he licks the plate clean. His bedroom can hardly be called a bedroom, with trash cans everywhere and a grass mat in the middle. However, such a person who is so stingy with himself is truly the richest person in the world. Some people, although wealthy, show little love for wealth. Alan Wilson is not about connotation. If you don't love money, you can like something else. From Ali Khan's later experience, he knows that this ruler of Hyderabad actually understands that all wealth is built on power and tries every way to put Hyderabad in an independent position. Before arriving in Hyderabad, before leaving North India, Alan Wilson and his group had to stop for a day at a train station. After inquiring, they found out that it was the local pacifists and Hindus fighting. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. The Monarch of Hyderabad. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. The Monarch of Hyderabad. Can't these people from South Asia do something more meaningful? The speaker was Andy, an assistant recruited by Alan from Delhi University, who was making arrogant comments about the suzerain country, appearing very impressive. Talking while standing doesn't hurt your back. In the past 2 years, there has been a lot of frequent fighting between pacifists and Hindus, whether in the states or provinces directly under the central government. Alan put down his cup and answered from the perspective of an observer. This indicates that another round of religious conflict is brewing, which has a huge relationship with the increasingly fierce conflict between Nehru of the Indian National Congress Party and Ali Jinnah, the leader of the Muhammad, affecting the two major religions. After speaking, Alan Wilson remained silent, which was naturally related to Britain. Since World War I, British India has adopted the method of using pacifists to balance Hindus. This is because during World War I, India supported British warfare in hopes that Britain would grant India the same status as Canada and Australia. However, Britain reneged on its promise and deliberately elevated the status of pacifists to suppress Indian discontent, not to mention others. The current Prime Minister of the British Empire, Churchill, was one of the advocates of this strategy. Delayed for a day, except for making everyone ridicule the Indians, this mechanical fight did not have any impact. The deaths were all Indians, and they were all British. After a week of walking and stopping, the group finally arrived within the territory of Hyderabad, and at this time, the army of the state of Hyderabad had already waited here to welcome the arrival of the new commissioner in Hyderabad. The two sides were harmonious, like old friends whom they had not seen for a long time. Hyderabad was located in South Asia, but it was an old leader of the British Empire. The cooperative relationship that lasted for more than 300 years laid the foundation for the birth of British India. Respected gentlemen, it is surprising that you and your assistants are so young. As expected, we will establish a long-term relationship. Ali Khan's son introduced himself and smiled as a friendly gesture. I hope so. Alan Wilson spoke politely, as if unaware that the other person's good days were only 3 years at best, creating a friendly atmosphere with the person he welcomed. From the Maratha War to the Indian Uprising, Alan Wilson worked hard to create a good atmosphere of relationship between the rulers of England and Hyderabad throughout history. Upon closer examination, apart from mutual praise, he did nothing on his first day in Hyderabad. The wars that have spread all over the world seem to have nothing to do with this homeland that has been going on for over 200 years. After taking over the British organization in Hyderabad, Alan discovered something that required a reassessment of the status of the Hyderabad territory. Hyderabad was able to directly contact the Indian Affairs Department in London. The Department of Indian Affairs is an important department in the UK, under the leadership of the Minister of Indian Affairs. After all, British India is extremely important to the world hegemony of the British Empire, and the UK has carried out multiple military operations due to India's security issues. In many military operations, Hyderabad has sent troops to assist. But in this World War, Hyderabad did not contribute much, and the reason was very simple. The alliance and role of Hyderabad state were mainly aimed at the internal affairs of British India. It is precisely what kind of internal turmoil occurred in South Asia that reflects the value of the emergence of Hyderabad, allowing it to play its role as a leading party, such as the threat posed by the Japanese army to British India during World War II, without the role played by the Hyderabad homeland. I didn't expect Hyderabad to be able to directly contact the London side. Knowing this, Alan Wilson contacted the London side through a telegram here, indicating that he, as the Hyderabad Commissioner, has taken office, reported and requested work at the same time. Is a mature civil service system a good thing or a bad thing? Alan Wilson couldn't help but twitch his lips as he watched London's response, no less than 8-part essay, because British India is so important to the UK. In the issue of India, the UK has its own national conditions here, and there are not just two departments that can manage India, and there is an objective fact of cross-management. At present, there are military officials from the Governor-General's Office of India, the Southeast Asian Theatre Command, and the Department of Indian Affairs who can speak up about British India. Alan Wilson, who has already infiltrated the civil service of the British Empire, knows that the so-called efficiency of the British civil service system is nothing but farting. Apart from tax collection, there is no time when it can be considered efficient. In the evening, within the British residential area of Hyderabad, a local Native American soldier arrived and directly approached Alan Wilson, saying, "Mr. Allen, our Lord Ali Khan will meet you tomorrow. I will come and let you know. Please reply, Ellen will arrive on time tomorrow. Upon learning of the other party's arrival, Ellen Wilson immediately put aside his frustration and calmly replied, building a bridge between Hyderabad and London is already something that the commissioner should do. This statement is spoken with great righteousness, as if it really seems like this. As for the purpose of the Hyderabad monarch, there is no need to speculate, as he will naturally speak when facing the other party. The land area of Hyderabad is almost the same as that of mainland England, with an estimated population of 20 million. Although the monarch Mir Osman Ali Khan gives people a stingy impression, as the monarch of this land state, his palace fully embodies the authority of a monarch. The palace is huge and has a Middle Eastern style. Under the guidance of his attendants, Alan Wilson walked through the garden in the palace and, under the attention of many guards, arrived inside. During this process, he had just faintly heard the chanting of scriptures, and after a moment of confusion, he understood that Mir Osman Ali Khan was a pacifist and should have just started worshipping. Later, Alan Wilson met the current largest monarch in South Asia, Mir Osman Ali Khan, in the palace. Mir Osman Ali Khan himself was short in stature, with a small beard under his nose. To be honest, he was somewhat similar to the heads of state of the Third Empire. As a monarch, he was more like a low-level farmer than the most powerful monarch in South Asia. As Alan Wilson looked at him, Mir Osman Ali Khan also looked at the new commissioner of Hyderabad, squinting his eyes for a moment before speaking, "You're so young. I believe New Delhi also values you very much. It's more like valuing gold." Alan Wilson smiled in his heart. If it weren't for him rushing old Wilson to dig the Indian Golden Temple after arriving in India, how could he have moved Sir Baron? I always need to have a certain level of workability, otherwise Governor Weaver and Sir Baron wouldn't hastily send me over to you. Alan Wilson paused slightly and whispered, "It's like money, something that everyone hopes to have, but the ultimate truth is, some people have it, some people don't. The Indian Golden Temple has been dug too many times, every book has it. If you don't write it anymore, write it again." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. The Position of Tu Bang. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. The Position of Tu Bang. Dear Ali Khan, please allow me to express the most sincere respect on behalf of the British Empire to you, a loyal ally for a long time. Alan Wilson spoke as an old civil servant, with a perfectly fitting smile, showing goodwill to the Earth Emperor who cannot be judged by appearance. For 300 years, Hyderabad and the royal family have had a very pleasant cooperation with the British Empire. This harmonious relationship has benefited us a lot, both in the past and in the future, and we hope that our friendship will continue. The similarity between you and the previous commissioner is that you speak the same formulaic words. Mir Osman Ali Khan smiled slightly, pointing out each other's commonalities and waving to the palace servants to prepare the meal. I just finished my service, and now I invite the new commissioner from Hyderabad to have lunch together, while also strengthening our relationship with each other. I feel very honored. Dear sir, your proficiency in English has surprised me. Alan Wilson responded to the invitation with a dismissive expression. Due to dimensional constraints, Hyderabad is considered to be located in South India, but due to the Deccan Plateau, the temperature here is not much higher than New Delhi. In the early climate, it feels a bit cool. However, it is evident that Mir Osman Ali Khan, as a native ruler of Hyderabad, has become accustomed to the climate here and prepared tableware for Alan Wilson, while he himself grasps food with his hands like an ordinary Indian, even with knives and forks prepared and placed next to the plate. Until the silver plate was licked clean, Mir Osman Ali Khan slowly spoke up, "As the new commissioner of Hyderabad, I warmly welcome your arrival. Whether it's New Delhi or London, I believe you have carefully considered it." At this moment, Alan Wilson realized that although the ruler of Hyderabad had never left his homeland, the news was very clear and had already fallen into the eyes of the other party even before he left New Delhi. From inquiring about the smooth progress of the British and Indian Army's march into Myanmar to hearing that Prime Minister Churchill is about to hold a meeting with the Soviet Union in Yalta, everything is clear and thorough. It's far from the way you licked the plate just now. After circling around, Mir Osman Ali Khan seemed to be indifferent and asked, I heard Nehru and Ali Jinnah had a heated argument, causing a lot of trouble for both New Delhi and London. To be honest, I personally don't really like this kind of argument. From a British perspective, of course I don't like it either, respected Lord. Alan Wilson listened and carefully glanced at Mir Osman Ali Khan's expression, feeling that the other person seemed to have something in mind. He spoke slowly, it seems that the Lord is very concerned about some news and wants an urgent answer. Well, I've heard some things, although it's a bit bad to ask before the war ends. Please understand that this involves the big problem of Hyderabad's existence. Mir Osman Ali Khan also didn't hide it, his thin body paired with a loud voice. I don't know how London views the current independence movement in British India, whether it's the claims of Ali Jinnah or Nehru. Alan Wilson was almost scratching his head, this question was beyond the scope of his specialist's ability to answer. Regarding whether British India will continue to exist, should we do our best to maintain it or let go and let India become independent? Believe it or not, neither the Conservative Party nor the Labour Party has an accurate answer in London now, and it should still be under discussion. It seems that Mir Osman Ali Khan's level of concern for this issue is extraordinary, otherwise he wouldn't have asked him about this newly appointed commissioner, which is a bit too eager. But the key is that he really can't answer this question, but just when he met with the monarch here, he couldn't give a clear answer, which may damage the relationship. It's not a big deal to damage the relationship between the British Empire and Hyderabad, and damaging personal relationships is something Alan Wilson doesn't want to see. The other party is not just the rulers of Hyderabad. Once India becomes independent, it will be driven away. It should be noted that Mir Osman Ali Khan is still the world's richest man on the cover of Time magazine in the United States. Even if he loses his position as a ruler, his enormous wealth is still impressive, even Alan Wilson, who dug a golden temple, is no exception. There is actually no consensus on this issue from the London side, respected Lord. However, in my personal capacity, I can imagine several possible situations to determine what kind of attitude the Lord will adopt. Alan Wilson made a very sincere expression and spoke in his personal name. Oh. Please speak. Mir Osman Ali Khan's face remained calm, not knowing what he was thinking. In fact, the idea of the National Congress Party represented by Nehru himself is a well-known fact, which is to hope that after independence, India can maintain the framework of a country, and what it wants is the heritage of the entire British Empire in South Asia. Alan Wilson added, this is under the premise of establishing India's final independence, and as for the Muhammad represented by Ali Jinnah, he is very resistant to the idea of living in the same country as Hindus. From the current attitude, Ali Jinnah's attitude is very tough, preferring to fight a civil war rather than compromise. I have also heard of Jinnah's attitude. Mir Osman Ali Khan nodded, clearly acknowledging Alan Wilson's analysis of the two most powerful local politicians in South Asia. The tone changed, but what about the status of a group of states, including Hyderabad? I don't know what the commissioner has to say. Let's imagine the worst-case scenario. Alan Wilson also knew that now was not the time to hide and hide. He had to be recognized by the ruler of Hyderabad on the first meeting. He was a commissioner with exceptional qualities, not a bribe-taker, even if he had indeed become a commissioner through bribery. Mir Osman Ali Khan was concerned about the issue of the ownership of the homeland, which involved his interests. Alan Wilson also knew that the issue of the homeland sparked a series of disputes after India's independence. Leaving aside Kashmir and Hyderabad, let's talk about two issues that have not received much attention, Sikkim and Bhutan. In the 1960s, one was annexed by India and the other became a protectorate of India. On the current map of British India, Sikkim and Bhutan are both part of British India and exist under the name of a homeland. India is constantly waging wars and also believes that it needs to restore the territory of British India. In other words, India has been confronting the territory of British India since ancient times. Putting this issue aside, what Nehru thinks is clearly not what Hyderabad monarch Mir Osman Ali Khan is concerned about. In fact, their positions are completely opposite. I should get a cover now. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. An Idealist Monarch. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. An idealist monarch. Leaving aside Sikkim and Bhutan, they are all on the edge of the South Asian subcontinent. As the largest land state in South Asia, Hyderabad occupies the center of the Deccan Plateau and is a place that the thriving North India must control in order to suppress the South India that has been outside the control of North India for most of the time. The gap between North and South in British India is much larger than in China. The Tamils of South India have established their own country several times, and apart from the belief in Hinduism, there is no similarity between North and South India. If it were Alan Wilson in Nehru's position, it would not be possible to assume that Hyderabad would continue to be in an independent position. Now let's talk about how, according to Alashina's idea, the two major religions each occupy the majority of their respective regions and establish their own independent states. Respected Lord, if I use a simple religious division, you should definitely lean towards Alashina, right? Alan Wilson pointed out Ali Khan's status as a pacifist. Ali Khan nodded without concealing this point and said, if there were only these two options, of course I would choose Ali Jinnah. This is difficult. Out of a pragmatic attitude, Alan Wilson gave Ali Khan a pessimistic analysis. Nehru will not let the state of Hyderabad maintain its status quo, and the Hyderabad state controlled by the Great Lord, whether from the northwest provinces of the same religion or from Bangladesh in the northeast, is far away. According to the worst-case scenario analysis, there will be a religious war in South Asia, and you will be under the siege of Hinduism without the rescue of other peaceful believers. It is really too far. Alan Wilson proved through practice that there is no worst, only worse, and continued in front of the silent Ali Khan, and in Hyderabad, Hindus make up 80%, and pacifists are an absolute minority. Once Nehru incites Hindus to adopt a referendum or any other way to find a reason, things are really difficult to do. By the way, the situation in the state of Junagadh is similar to that in Hyderabad. The state of Junagadh is located on the Kathiawar Peninsula in India, covering an area of approximately 50,000 square kilometers. The situation in this state is similar to that of Hyderabad, with over 80% of its residents being Hindus and the monarch being a pacifist. Later, the king of the state decided to join Pakistan, but the residents of the state strongly opposed it, leading to riots. The monarch fled to Pakistan, and then India took over the state power. But later on, Kashmir, which caused the Indo-Pakistani War, was exactly the opposite. The king was Hindu, and the majority of the residents were pacifists. Kashmir eventually became the trigger of the Indo-Pakistani War. Before the British withdrawal, due to the issue of the homeland, it was not just a Kashmir issue. The territories of Hyderabad and Junagadh were the same problem as Kashmir, and in the end, only one mine exploded in Kashmir, which is considered Nehru's skill. Speaking of which, after independence, India was not even prepared to talk to Pakistan. If the monarch was a pacifist, a majority of Hindus would vote in a referendum, and if the monarch was a Hindu, it would show respect for the opinions of the local monarch. Yours is mine is mine. This attitude is applied wherever India can see it, and it persisted until the 21st century. Will it definitely be divided according to Ali Jinnah's intention? London can completely continue to rule South Asia. After thinking about it, Ali Khan couldn't help but feel irritable. It's possible to continue to maintain London's rule. Isn't Churchill the same attitude as Prime Minister? Alan Wilson remained silent, unable to answer the question. It cannot be said that the earth has changed its owner. Now, the strength of the United States and the Soviet Union has surpassed that of Britain's dilapidated aristocracy. If Britain wants to maintain its rule in South Asia, it will definitely not be allowed by the United States and the Soviet Union. The two countries will not see Britain slowly using British India to recover its vitality after World War I. After World War I, Britain's strength remained strong and was still in the same category as the United States. At that time, the United States dared not gamble on its national fate and fought against the British Empire with all its might, and could only return to the Americas to continue isolationism. Nowadays, it is different from the past. The strength of the United States has surpassed that of Britain, and it will never be like being boycotted by the joint efforts of Britain and France after World War I. During the Suez Canal War, the joint efforts of Britain and France finally gathered the dignity of old imperialism. What will happen in the end? Simultaneously threatened by the joint efforts of the United States and the Soviet Union. As the Commissioner of the British Empire in Hyderabad, Alan Wilson cannot say that Britain is no longer able to preserve its military presence in South Asia. So, where should the face of the British Empire go? After much thought, he put forward the argument of the London liberal imperialists and said, now that the Indian people generally have the idea of independence, protests and riots are rampant. The annual profits from British India can no longer offset the expenses of operating in British India, and London will not engage in profitable transactions. Alan Wilson himself didn't believe this statement. Although such voices have existed for a long time, who would take noise seriously if they could continue to rule South Asia? Even the rebellious United States is skilled in protesting against reactionary war while continuing the war. Pretending that London must respect public opinion and push back the rhetorical questions of the Hyderabad Monarch does not mean that the Hyderabad Commissioner is not prepared to do nothing before British India is about to become independent. Ali Khan has billions of dollars in wealth, and with just a little bit of it given to him as a commissioner, it is a figure that ordinary people cannot earn in their lifetime. Although Alan Wilson has dug up the Indian Golden Temple, who would mind having too much money? Furthermore, Alan Wilson has reasons to cause trouble for India in both past and present lives. Leaving aside past events, the division of India and Pakistan must prioritize the interests of Hindus in the overall environment, which cannot be changed. Because at a larger macro level, from the Strait of Gibraltar all the way to Indonesia, there is a widespread world of peace religions. Opening the world map reveals at a glance that India, after independence, was an important link in severing the connection between the world of peace and religion. If, on the other hand, after independence, South Asia appears as a leader of the peace religion, and the important cornerstone of cutting off the peace religion world no longer exists. The small countries on the Indo-Chinese peninsula are not capable of resisting the oppression of the peace religion. So the emergence of India, with a predominantly Hindu population, is a good thing for the current world situation. On the other hand, after independence, India may become the leader of the peace religion world, which is a bad thing for any major country. You should know that the current outbreak in Europe began with completely trampling on the world of peace in the Middle East. He believed that even the Soviet Union and countries with the same mindset as the Soviet Union hoped that India would shoulder the responsibility of cutting off the peace religion. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Personal Parade. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Personal Parade. However, India's expansionist mindset, which feels good about itself, is still a problem. While Hindus are the main force suppressing the power of the peace religion, we cannot let India become too strong. It is best to find something to do for India, which does not go against the original intention of contributing to the world. Now it is necessary to choose the slightly less disgusting one in front of two bastards. This is not a good multiple-choice question, but I believe the entire British Empire cannot come up with a more suitable solution. Dear Sir, when do you think this war will end? Alan Wilson changed his tone and asked an seemingly unrelated question. This actually questions the ruler of Hyderabad. The war has been going on for many years, and the Allied powers have already gained an advantage, which is visible to everyone. But who knows exactly when the war will end? Respected Lord, only strength can be respected. Alan Wilson said with a reserved attitude, "There are now 5 million British Empire troops fighting on various battlefields, representing the strong military power of the British Empire. However, the war will eventually come to an end, but their weapons have already been manufactured. The tanks they operate, the planes they pilot, and the warships they carry are an unimaginable military legacy. Instead of rusting, it is best to use their remaining heat after the war ends, which will also reduce the losses of the British Empire." "What do you mean?" Ali Khan seemed to have grabbed something, but his tone was still somewhat uncertain. "Dear Lord, I would like to see the army of Hyderabad as soon as possible." Alan Wilson nodded, confirming Ali Khan's speculation that the weapons used by 5 million soldiers would not be a problem in boosting the army of the homeland. As for Hyderabad's army, it is clear that the rulers have religious beliefs. It goes without saying that this army must be primarily based on the religion of peace. The most fundamental reason is that Ali Khan, as a monarch with wealth, could bear the flow of these weapons after the war. Can you do it? As a monarch, Mir Osman Ali Khan scrutinized with a skeptical tone. If the war had ended earlier, there would have been a time to do so. If nothing was done, the worst outcome would have been to surrender. Now, to answer the king's question, let some of the military supplies flow into Hyderabad. I think it's possible. Alan Wilson gave a positive answer, thinking that once the war ends, it's not difficult to sell some of the military supplies. Alan Wilson knew that out of the current 5.7 million troops of the British Empire, there were 2.58 million Indian soldiers, accounting for nearly half, which seems to be a significant number. But this is something that all colonies of the British Empire can afford. Once India becomes independent, it cannot afford to support over 2 million troops with its own financial resources. In fact, in the early days of India's independence, it was not known for its military strength, and of course, it was not a problem to bully Pakistan. And he knew about the evolution of the Indian Army. The Indian Army was mainly composed of veterans, and their service years were generally very long. Indian soldiers who fought in World War II even served in the Indian Army in 1962, and a large number of them also served in the Indian Army. In 1945, these soldiers in their 20s and 30s became the main force almost 20 years later. Being taught to be human in high-altitude areas, Alan Wilson's evaluation of Indian soldiers is not high. Supplementing Hyderabad's military strength is also the most effective approach. Since meeting Mir Osman Ali Khan, Alan Wilson has had a goal in his heart, which is to reap as much benefits as possible during the process of British India's independence, which will play an important role in his future promotion in the British civil service system. British India's status is extremely important, but it does not belong to the British mainland, which can actually be very awkward at some level. For example, how many of the 100,000 civil servants currently working in British India can continue to hold iron rice bowls once British India becomes independent? No one knows that Alan Wilson definitely doesn't want his presence in the army of job seekers. Although the sparrow is small and has all 5 organs, the Hyderabad state has all the elements of a country. The entire state is the private property of Mir Osman Ali Khan himself. In order to protect the sacred and inviolable private property, Mir Osman Ali Khan naturally does not care about what the entire Hindu community is thinking. Coincidentally, as a British, the current commissioner of Hyderabad also does not consider what the residents of the colony think. The fact is very clear, Ali Khan has plenty of money and now wants to maintain his position as the private kingdom of Hyderabad. And Alan Wilson, for the sake of money, decided to help the allies of the British Empire for 300 years. A few days later, Alan Wilson arrived at the Hyderabad military camp with a few assistants to observe whether this private army had any remarkable features. To be honest, in the eyes of Alan Wilson, who had seen the steel tide of later generations, this private army in the Hyderabad homeland was not impressive enough. Some people had guns, that's all. The heavy weapon was the Maxim machine gun widely used during World War I, while the semi-automatic rifle belonged only to Mir Osman Ali Khan's personal guard, and the most eye-catching was Hyderabad's cavalry unit. Upon seeing this scene, Alan Wilson even had a feeling of being in India for a military parade, almost able to transport a company of motorcycles, and he didn't know what Moody Ferry was feeling when watching the motorcycle show. Anyway, as a specialist, his mood was not very good. "Commissioner, the Lee Enfield rifles of these Hyderabad soldiers seem to be very old models." Andy, the assistant who came with him, whispered, "Is Ali Khan showing off his strength to us?" "That's not true, it's just a simple display," Alan Wilson said without looking back. "What is this?" Not to mention 1945, even in the 21st century, the aging Lee Enfield rifle, which was established in 1896, is still the main light weapon of the Indian Army. After the exercise of the Hyderabad Private Army ended, Alan Wilson immediately reached out and applauded, with an expression that was truly an ally of the British Empire for 300 years. He was very impressed by the lackluster performance of the exercise. With a formulaic smirk, Alan Wilson said to Ali Khan's son, Abraham, "The army of Hyderabad is truly an ally of the British Empire for a long time. To be honest, this army, mainly composed of pacifists, is not inferior in scale compared to the soldiers of the Indian Legion. However, considering the current combat literacy of the European army, there are still some areas that need to be improved. Considering the army of Hyderabad, there will definitely be a battle with the Indian army in the future. As a Hyderabad commissioner, he certainly doesn't have any bad words. What if he dampens the morale of this Indian enemy?" End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Finding a Backroad. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Finding a Backroad. Even Alan Wilson knows that with Hyderabad's geographical location and population composition, it is almost impossible to resist the Indian Army's attack, but for the sake of money, this is currently the most professional army in South Asia. Compared to the Hyderabad Commissioner in British India, he is now clearly more focused on Ali Khan's role as a dog-headed military strategist. After all, the wages in British India are dead, far from being tempted by the financial resources of the former world's richest man. Although Alan Wilson was a keyboardist in his previous life, he has only witnessed and heard about logistics work with old Wilson in this life, far less impressive than the Great Famine in Bangladesh. But he still has a say in the armies in South Asia that cannot be supported by mud, let alone as a commissioner of Hyderabad and a close partner of the current monarch, dedicated to the future of the Hyderabad homeland. Even if the military strength of the British Empire is not particularly strong in the army. Hiding the essence of his military blindness, Alan Wilson, with some political inaccuracies, used the Axis powers as the leader and the Third Reich Army as a benchmark, stating that tanks were a necessary weapon for the current Hyderabad army. Europe has already caused 2 world wars in decades, in which ideas and tactics emerged, providing a glimmer of comfort for this immense destructive power. The Hyderabad army must be equipped with sufficient tanks to deter potential enemies. Alan Wilson said, cutting off the nails and iron, and the military's blindness was justified. It is not a problem to intimidate a group of high caste officers with the words of "King of Land War" and "Bhutan Synergy" constantly coming out of their mouths, coupled with seemingly mysterious but actually shrouded expressions. The peace religion in South Asia is also casted. The world war is now coming to an end, and the strength is evident. How to deal with a large amount of future military equipment is also a problem. Hyderabad needs these weapons, and many states also need them, even Ali Jinnah and Nehru. Alan Wilson walked on, but whether it's for national interests or personal reasons, I hope that those weapons will fall into the hands of friendly people. The friendship between Hyderabad and the British Empire has been proven through bloody battles time and time again, said Abraham, half public and half private. It has been tested by blood and practice. I know this, but the issues considered in London are more comprehensive. Those London politicians never prioritize morality when considering issues. In a sense, I and the young assistants I bring will actually make irrational judgments, while those old men will not. Alan Wilson said with a smile on his face, in short, as a friend, I am definitely qualified and will try my best to protect Hyderabad's interests. Talking about the importance of oneself to Hyderabad is not entirely self-proclaimed, and the analysis of London politicians is not entirely defamatory. It is clear what British politicians are like to see the rebellious American who has followed suit. Returning to the residential area of the British and discussing this matter with their assistants, not everyone agreed. After all, not all of these newly graduated assistants were familiar with the status of British India. Commissioner Allen, why are we so concerned about a homeland? One of the 10 assistants, a woman named Eliza, puzzled. And this is not something we can decide, should we inform the Delhi side? Eliza is 1 year older than Alan Wilson. Although she is not an absolute beauty, she is also a charming woman. With long red hair draped over her shoulders, she stands tall in front of Alan Wilson, her fair face full of confusion. Who else is as confused as Alice? Alan Wilson took out a cigarette and lit it, waving his other hand as if seeking advice. Suddenly, 4 assistants raised their hands. Alan Wilson nodded and said, I don't hide this from you. I treat you as my own people, and to be honest, your situation is the same as mine. Many people don't know the land under our feet so well, at least not a single one of you knows. Now, whether it's the Congress Party or the Muhammad, India is striving for independence, right? So what's going on? As long as London doesn't allow it, they can still drive us away, said an assistant dissatisfied. Do you think that after this great war, Britain can still have the opportunity to breathe like it did after World War I? Alan Wilson's lips curled slightly. If we really have that opportunity, that would be a good thing. But will the Americans and Soviets give us time? This is the downside of bringing a group of college students to take office. If it's bringing experienced senior civil servants, with just one rhetorical question, they know what's going on, but these college students can't. Alan Wilson had no choice but to return to his previous career and analyze the current world situation, with pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union on the outside and criticism from Nehru and Jinnah on the inside. From his words, the British Empire now has a hint of internal and external troubles, even more dangerous than when dealing with the attack of the Third Empire. It was always like this, even if the British Empire faced the attack of the Third Empire alone, with the support of British colonies, as long as they spared no effort, they could not repeat the glory of World War I. And now facing pressure from the United States and the Soviet Union, coupled with the fact that various levels within British India are no longer aligned with Britain. It is almost impossible to be tough in order to protect British India. What is the strength of the United States and the Soviet Union, and how powerful is their current momentum? It's not something that these students in colonies can see. Later history also proved this point, as Britain chose a soft landing and granted independence to its colonies in batches, starting from the most important colony, British India. This was a compromise with the United States and the Soviet Union, indicating that the era of the British Empire taking control of the world has passed. Even if Alan Wilson knew the future trend, he had no ability to change history, but it was the United States and the Soviet Union. How could these two countries believe that Britain has really given up world hegemony without giving up British India? However, during the process of the British Empire's soft landing, it was possible to preserve some colonies that were geographically important and easy to control. Don't be so independent and clean, Alan thinks it can still be achieved. And the colonial empire was not just the British Empire itself. France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and even Portugal were all considered dilapidated aristocrats. I'm not slow with 2 chapters a day, right? It's October 1st and the editor hasn't finished his vacation yet. Public period editors never urge submissions, which is completely different from when they are listed, and may even slow you down. End of this chapter.